Hi, I'm Lucy, one of the teachers here at Bread Ahead Bakery School, and throughout this video I'm going to teach you how to make these lovely peach Melba donuts. So we're going to cover the filling, which is our lovely vanilla creme pat mixed with some double cream. We're also going to poach our peaches in a vanilla and lemon syrup, and then topped they have got a lovely raspberry sauce and then icing sugar coated almonds. So first up, we're going to make our vanilla creme patissiere filling, and then while that is cooling, we'll make all the other elements for our peach Melba donuts. Okay, so we're going to make the creme patisserie filling for our donuts, and then once that custard has set, we will then whip up some double cream with some caster sugar to make that nice light fluffy filling that we will love. So first of all, you want to have your ingredients ready, because once we get this cooking, it all happens quite quickly. So always good practice to have your ingredients pre-weighed. So it requires 500 grams of full fat milk, which I've got here, whole milk in there. I've got my vanilla pod ready, which I'll cut, scoop out those vanilla seeds and start to infuse that milk later. You could use a vanilla extract or vanilla flavouring as well. You can steep your milk with that sort of flavouring too. Then here, we've got our egg yolks. This is 150 grams of egg yolks, which is about 6 egg yolks. So crack your eggs, separate them, and then we just need the yolk for this recipe. We've also got 125 grams of caster sugar, 60 grams of flour, plain flour this time, and then which we'll be using later, we'll be using our double cream, so 120 grams of double cream, and then I've just got some more caster sugar here. We'll just be adding a couple of tablespoons to that, but these two will come later on, okay, once that custard has cooled and set. So the first stage, you need to have your saucepan ready, okay, and a bowl. And we're going to infuse our milk with that vanilla. So 500 grams goes into my saucepan. Fabulous. And then I'm going to cut open that vanilla pod and scoop out the beans. So going straight down the middle of that vanilla pod. There we go. Open it up nicely. A little bit fiddly there, and we'll scoop out the beans. And vanilla pods are a bit of an investment these days, so what I suggest you do is keep your vanilla pod if you're using one, and you can keep it and pop it in your sugar that you can then later dust your donuts with, so you've got nice vanilla sugar, or pop it in a bottle of vodka and you make yourself a vanilla extract, or you drink the vodka, lovely. So always get a second use out of those vanilla pods. Beautiful, okay. So the first stage is to heat your milk. You want it just to come up to a boil, so you just want to steep your milk in that vanilla extract there. So while your milk is steeping, you want to focus on your emulsion, which is a mixture of your egg, your sugar, and then that form of starch as plain flour. So 150 grams of egg yolk going into your mixing bowl. Like so. And then in with the sugar, 125 grams. Pop that in there, and you want to whisk the two together. When you mix caster sugar and egg yolks together, you want to get whisking quite promptly, because it can, your yolks can start to crystallize in that sugar. So once you combine them, just get whisking quite promptly. And then we're going to pop that form of starch in there, which will thicken our creme patisserie later. So in goes 60 grams of plain flour, and then whisking together. And we want to whisk this to a stage called ribbon stage or ribbon twill. And when I get there, I'll show you what it looks like. But essentially, you lift up your whisk with some mixture on top, and if you can draw a little pattern of a figure of 8, and you can then still see the pattern on top of the mixture, you know you're there. So let's have a little look. A nice figure of 8, quickly draw it, and if it lasts a second, I'm happy, okay? Perfect. So my milk has boiled and it is beautifully steeped with that vanilla. But of course, if you're not wanting to make a vanilla creme pat, you can infuse your milk with all sorts of other flavourings, perhaps rose water, orange blossom. You could even use maybe an Earl Grey tea or something like that. But we're sticking to vanilla today. Now, I can't go and pour all that boiling milk over my egg yolk mixture because, well, I risk scrambling them. Granted, it would be lovely vanilla sweet scrambled egg yolk, but that is not what we're after. So we have to do something called temper the egg yolks. So you pour half your milk on, or a little bit at a time, and then you whisk to combine. And that just prevents any sort of scrambling. Okay, just like so. And then you can go on pouring more on. Smells incredible. Okay, fabulous. Oh, just like so. So, looks good. Well, it smells really, really lovely. But it's too thin. And if you were to try it now, you would be able to taste that starch. So we've got to put this back onto a medium heat, continuously whisking to then cook out that starch and for our creme patisserie to thicken. Now, I'm okay here today, but if you had burnt your milk and it's caught on the bottom of the saucepan, I encourage you to wash that saucepan, just give it a good scrub. Because when you go back into there and you start whisking, it encourages the rest of your creme patisserie to burn. And then that egg will start to cook, which we don't want. So wash out your saucepan if you have burnt your milk. Okay, so then the mixture goes back into the saucepan. We can make sure we get everything out of there. And we go back onto the heat to cook out all the starch. Okay, put it back on. And on a medium heat, you want to whisk continuously until it starts to thicken. Okay, so I'm almost there. I can feel some resistance on my whisk, so I know it's starting to thicken. Now, if you're getting worried, what you can do is just turn the heat down, okay? If you're getting worried that it's going to thicken too quickly or risk burning it, just turn that heat down or take it off the heat and you're fine, okay? But we want it a little bit thicker than this. But I don't know if you can see there, it's starting to thicken slightly. So we're just going to go back onto a nice low heat and go low and slow, okay? Okay, so we're there. It's nice and thick. And what you want to see a little bubble, okay? You want it to come to a boil because that is when you know that you have cooked out that starch and you won't be able to taste it. Because there's nothing worse than a sort of floury, raw floury kind of flavour and also on the mouthfeel. It doesn't taste too nice. So it's lovely and thick. Now, you could pour it into a bowl, but a larger surface area, your creme patisserie is going to cool down a little bit quicker. So I've got my tray here with a piece of parchment. So have a tray, or you can go into a bowl. Tap off your whisk, and then onto the tray we go with that lovely thick custard that's beautiful and smooth. Perfect. Lovely stuff. Okay, beautiful. There we go. Now, if you had burnt, or the egg yolk had started to cook a little bit. What you could do is pass, while it's still hot, pass your creme patisserie through a sieve, and then the bits of congealed egg will stay in the sieve and you've got yourself a nice smooth creme patisserie again. Now, we want to do something called cover to touch. And you can use a piece of parchment, or cling film also does the job. And it literally means cover to touch. So you want to tap it down onto the surface of that mixture, because if you don't, it will form a skin. Now, that skin, it doesn't taste very nice. And if you mix it back in, it creates a lumpy mixture, which obviously we don't want, okay? So what we'll do, we'll allow this to cool. And then once it's cooled, we'll whip up some double cream with some caster sugar and then combine the two, and that is why our filling is nice and light and fluffy and doesn't taste too heavy. So we'll pop that to one side just to cool for now. Okay, so now while that's cooling, let's go ahead and make our toasted almonds, our raspberry sauce, and poach our peaches. So our poaching syrup for our lovely peaches. So I've got my peaches here, and we want to poach them so they taste a little bit citrusy and vanilla as well. But first, let's cut them into shape. And we want little crests so they sit perfectly on top of our donut, and then they'll be nice and soft. So I'm gonna go ahead and prep my fruit, and then we'll go and make that poaching syrup. So once you have halved your peaches, you want to cut them into shapes. I think they look like little crests or little moons, like so, okay? Perfect. Okay, so we have prepared our peaches, and now we want to prepare our poaching liquid. So have a saucepan to hand. First thing, vanilla, okay? So you can use a vanilla pod and extract some of the beans, or you can use a good quality sort of vanilla extract or vanilla essence as well. And you can just put a teaspoon or a capful in there, but we've got a lovely vanilla pod, so we'll be using that today. So then you just scrape out the beans, like so, going into the ice saucepan. And I always advise keep the vanilla pod and pop it into sugar, and then you can use that lovely vanilla sugar because it will slowly infuse to then dust your donuts when we come to sugar our donuts when they come out the fryer. Like so, perfect. And then I've got 400 grams of water going into my saucepan, along with a large amount of sugar, 265 grams of caster sugar going in. And then we want to add that lovely citrus, which will infuse into our peaches. So then it's about 1/4 of a lemon zested going in. This was the zest of the whole lemon. And then in this pot, I've got some freshly squeezed lemon juice, and I'm just going to go in with 2 teaspoons of lemon. And then I'll just give it a little mix to combine everything. And we'll be boiling that syrup and then adding our peaches, okay? So onto the hob, and I'll turn the heat on. So my sugar syrup has just come up to a boil. So what I'm going to do is pop in my peaches. And then here I'm just going to use a piece of parchment just to cover the top. You could use a lid, but a piece of parchment also does the job, as you can see. And you want to boil your peaches till they are soft. So the knife will go through and you want them just to slip off of that knife. Now that will depend on how ripe or soft your peaches are before they go into that sugar syrup. So I'll keep an eye on my timer and then I'll let you know. Ours were quite hard, so I'm predicting they'll probably take about 10 minutes to poach. Okay, so while my peaches are poaching, I'm going to clear this away and we'll get on to making our other two components for this donut filling. So let me pop these to one side. And then we want to focus on our toasted almonds, our toasted sugared almonds. So first things first, let's preheat the oven to 170 degrees fan. And just here, already prepped, I have my flaked almonds and icing sugar. So here we've got 100 grams of flaked almonds and I've got a tray already lined, and we'll scatter them across the tray and they will roast in the oven or toast in the oven for about 4 to 6 minutes. Now I advise you not to walk away and leave them and forget about them, because these can tend to catch quite quickly and then they burn and they taste bitter, which obviously we don't want. So scatter them on your tray, like so. Perfect. And then ready for when they come out of the oven, I've got 50 grams of icing sugar, and I've also got a little sift here, because once they have roasted, after that 4 to 6 minutes, we'll see what colour they catch in that time. We'll then dust them with that icing sugar, and then I've got a fork because they'll be hot. Sprinkle it, make sure that it's all coated and all covered in your almonds, and then they'll go back into that 170 degree oven for another 4 to 5 minutes, okay? So I've scattered my 100 grams of flaked almonds on the tray, and here I've got 25 grams of icing sugar with my sieve ready, which will then, once they've come out of the oven, we'll then dust over that 25 grams of icing sugar, and then they'll go back into the oven for another 4 to 5 minutes. Okay, so that's my oven up to temperature. In they go, and I'll be setting my timer. Fabulous. So in the meantime, that will remain there for when they come out the oven. In the meantime, we want to make that lovely raspberry puree that will then spoon over the top, nice and tart. So in my bowl here, I've got 130 grams of raspberries. You can buy them fresh or frozen. Ours are frozen. I've also got a fork ready to mash them down. We'll be adding a teaspoon of icing sugar and then a couple of drops of lemon to taste as well, because we want it to be a nice drizzly consistency to then drizzle over the top of our donuts. So first things first, you've got to mash your raspberries down. Obviously, if you're buying frozen ones, let them just defrost a little while. Fabulous. That's perfect. Okay, beautiful. And then a couple of teaspoons of icing sugar going in. And you can just mix that in. And then a few drops of lemon. I've got my lemon already juiced. How wonderful is that? So I'll start with sort of half a teaspoon. And mix that together. So you can see it's going to be a nice pouring consistency. And you can adjust with the icing sugar and the lemon juice to taste as well, depending on how tart or sweet you like it. Perfect. So that is the timer for my flaked almonds. So I'm going to get them out of the oven. So there's a little bit of colour starting to catch on the top. Looking good. So it's time to sprinkle over, well, sieve over that icing sugar. And it's always good practice to sift icing sugar, just because it does tend to absorb a little bit of moisture and go lumpy, which obviously we don't want big clumps. And then using my fork, I'm just going to toss them in that mixture. Lovely. And then spread them back out again, and they'll be going into the oven for another 5 minutes. Marvellous. So the timer has just gone off for those toasted almonds, so let's have a look at what they look like. Fabulous. Okay, so we've got a nice golden colour on our almonds. So they're going to taste lovely and, well, nutty. So we'll leave them to one side to cool. And let's have a look at our peaches that have been in that poaching syrup. Pop them to one side. Beautiful. So I'm going to take the parchment off of that lovely syrup. And let's have a look at the texture of one of my peaches. It's like going fishing for a peach. But my knife just goes through that nice, slides through. So that is perfect. Okay, so what I'll do, I'll drain them out of that syrup so they don't keep cooking, and then leave them up to one side to cool. So here we go. Fabulous. So there they are. Beautiful. So that is all our components ready, and then we'll go into assembling our peach Melba donuts. Okay, so our creme pâtissière has been chilled in the fridge, and if I just quickly show you, you can see there it's nice and thick, okay? But before we go and add it to my bowl, I need to whip my double cream. So I've got 120 grams of double cream, and I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar to that, and I'm just going to whisk it till soft peaks, okay? So I'm just going to do it by hand. You could use an electric mixer or a stand mixer, but it's not too much cream, so I don't mind doing this amount by hand. It won't take too long. Okay, there we go. I'll start whisking, and then I'll go and add my couple of tablespoons of sugar, and I'll just mix that through. Just like so, pretty quick, okay? So let's have a little look. We'll take off the paper from my pastry cream. Beautiful. And I want to get the most out of this, so I've got a scraper here. I'll scrape off of parchment paper, and then I'm going to pop that through. Pop that to one side. I'll use my spatula to help me get it off with that scraper. Beautiful. Fabulous. Let's get it off that tray. Very nice. Fabulous. Let's try not to make a mess, which usually I'm not very good at. I tend to make a mess everywhere I go, but not too bad. Not too bad at all. Beautiful, so let's get rid of those pieces of parchment paper. I'll pop that underneath for now. And then I'm just going to use a spatula to fold everything together. Very nice. So you can see it's getting lighter in colour. Delicious. And those lovely spots of vanilla. It's going to add all that flavour in there as well. Fabulous. Make sure everything is combined together. Perfect. So, for this amount, what I'm going to do is actually split it into 2 piping bags, just because I find it easier to pipe with a smaller amount in the piping bag rather than one big large one. I feel like I've got more control when I've got it in a smaller amount. So I've got a couple of piping bags just laid in the jug here, and I'll tip half in, and then we'll go and do the remaining half. Fabulous, just by eye. Beautiful. There's one piping bag full. Tie a knot at the top, and then we'll put the rest in my second piping bag there. Perfect. Making sure we get everything out the bowl. Don't want to waste that. Deliciousness. Marvellous. Ready to fill some donuts. Okay, so let's go ahead and construct our peach Melba donuts. I've got all the components to do so on my table. So this time our donuts, they're going to be laying flat, and we're going to make a hole in the top, and we're going to pipe from the top. I've got my flaked almonds dusted in that lovely icing sugar, my raspberry sauce, and of course the poached peaches as well. So let's go ahead and make the holes in the top of our donuts. So you make a little cavity, okay, and then you want to just go around and create some space using your finger. Just make sure you don't go all the way to the bottom, because you don't want your filling coming out the bottom like so. So you just go around and make the hole in all of them. Like so. Fabulous. Creating that space for our lovely vanilla filling. Okay, marvellous. So, let's cut a hole in my piping bag, like so. And then for each one, you're going to fill from the top, create a little bulb on top with that vanilla. Okay, so filling each one up, creating a bulb on the top, which will then stick that lovely poached peach on top of there. Fabulous. Delicious. Beautiful. Okay, so then our peaches. They're going to go on top, like so. Pop one on. Right in the centre. Like so. Fabulous. And then we can drizzle on, I'm going to use a teaspoon for this, drizzle on, I'll fix my peach that's fallen, look at that. Our lovely raspberry syrup going over the top. Beautiful. Look at the colour. Stunning. Oh, they look delicious already. Perfection. And then we're just going to top with those lovely roasted almonds, which is going to add some crunch as well, so contribute to a little bit of texture. Fabulous. Scatter them all over the top. Oh, don't they look pretty? Oh, I'm excited to try one. Beautiful. Stick one on there. And that is your finished product, so delicious. So that concludes our peach Melba filling. So we've got that lovely vanilla custard, our poached peaches in the vanilla and lemon syrup. We've then got our toasted sugared almonds and that lovely raspberry topping on top. So these are best enjoyed, well, served immediately. You can keep your fillings in the fridge and then construct as and when you wish to serve them. But yes, thank you very much for joining us. I hope you enjoyed this video and we look forward to seeing you next month for Doughnut Club. So if you want to stay up to date with all of our fillings for Doughnut Club, make sure you subscribe so you get notifications and can watch the rest of our videos.